In mathematics, vectors can also be represented as boldface lowercase letters. Therefore, we can say the vector v in the plane is equal to the directed line segment PQ. Its magnitude, or the length of the vector, is denoted by double vertical bar PQ double vertical bar, and can be found using the distance formula. Just to remind you, this is the distance formula. So let's write a simple function in Unity that gives us the distance. We want it to return the float value of the distance, vector 3a and vector 3b. Return, we use the math library to do a lot of things like the square root. So I'm going to return the square root of this whole function. And to even do power, you have to pull the math library. So that's the second minus the first squared plus the next value. And we do have z, but it really doesn't matter. And I'll show you how much it doesn't matter by just not using it. So up here, instead of using this label to tell the position of the first vector, I'm going to use it to tell the distance of the two vectors. So string.format distance equals 0 f2. Call the function that we just made and put into p and q, and that should do it just about. So we run our scene. I see that distance is 3.61. Luckily, we don't have to calculate distance ourselves and implement that function whenever we want to use it. Unity has a built-in function, and we're just going to show it on the same line. Unity distance and 1 f2. So the Unity distance is going to be, it's part of vector 3. I'm just going to get the distance of p and q. And it'll say the same thing. Awesome. It's easiest to think about vectors when we can simplify them with common standards and give proper names to useful vectors that we'll commonly use. Any vector whose initial point is the origin is considered to be in standard position. This vector, which starts at the origin, can be represented by the coordinates of its terminal point. This is the component form of a vector. The coordinates v1 and v2 are components of v. Component form is always going to be written with angle brackets. If both the initial point and the terminal point are at the origin, v is a special vector called the zero vector. If the magnitude or length of v is equal to 1, this is called a unit vector, but we'll talk about unit vectors a little bit later. Unity has a lot of these special vectors built in, so let's just replace our initial point p with a zero vector. So vector 3 dot 0. That was really hard. And let's also change our notation down here from these parentheses to these angle brackets. Since our vector q is in standard form, we can get the magnitude of our vector, and Unity has a built-in function to get the magnitude, so we don't have to calculate that. So we'll just add that on to our original string and read out the magnitude. We just want to get q's magnitude. As long as it's in standard form, the magnitude and the distance are both going to be the same. But as soon as we take this out of standard form, we can see that q's magnitude is always the same, but the distance between these two objects are not. That's the difference between distance and magnitude. If we wanted to represent that magnitude, we can just draw a new line that's from vector 3.0 to q, color.red again. And we'll change this first one to color.white. So red's the magnitude and white is the distance. Let's also make sure that this label stays at vector 3.0 so we don't drag it around. Back in Unity, I'm going to make a vector 3v to be the component form of the directed line segment PQ. So we're going to create a new vector 3 q.x minus p dot x, q dot y minus p dot y. And the third one's just going to be 0 because we don't care about that plane. Instead of getting the magnitude of q, which is in standard form, I'm going to get the magnitude of v, which is our directed line segment. So if we go back in here and run our scene again, we can see that this is the distance from P to Q. If we move this around, we still get the correct distance and magnitude between P and Q.
Just recapping what we've done so far, you've seen that I've drawn two line segments. The first one is red and represents only the vector which extends to the point Q. Since vectors are always assumed to be in standard form, we've started drawing the vector at 0 and ended at the point Q. Moreover, when you look at the magnitude of a single vector such as Q, you are essentially getting the distance from 0 to Q. In this way, distance and magnitude are nearly interchangeable. Now, with the white line segment, which goes from point P to point Q, we have used component form to give us a new vector that is not P or not Q, but it's PQ. The vector PQ is in component form and has a unique distance and magnitude of its own. The most important thing you need to take away from component form and standard form is that Unity will always consider a vector to be in standard form unless you specify otherwise. I've beaten my head over this trivial problem more times than I want to admit. So if you don't account for where you start, Unity assumes that you want to start from the origin.